This is our discussion of the Washington administration and examining what are the key aspects of the George Washington administration and why it is so important for American history. If you take a look up here, it is Washington who establishes the precedents for the president. Nobody knew what a president was or what a president did. It was described in the Constitution, but when you take it and you actually put it into practice, nobody knew exactly what the office was all about. Washington knew that whatever he did was going to be copied by subsequent generations. So therefore, he was very careful in the things he chose to do and say, knowing that he would be establishing precedents for people in the future. So, one of the first things he does is he names a cabinet, a group of advisors, people to help him out. Somebody who's a military guy for Secretary of War, someone who's a money guy for Secretary of the Treasury, someone who is an expert in foreign policy for Secretary of State, and someone who's an expert in the law for Attorney General. The first cabinet was only made up of 4 guys, but 4 very brilliant guys. Now, did it say anywhere in the Constitution that the president could create a cabinet? So why does Washington create a cabinet? How can Washington create a cabinet if it doesn't explicitly say it in the Constitution that he can do it? It is the elastic clause, and you are going to find that George Washington is a firm believer in the elastic clause. It doesn't say, I can't name a cabinet, so I'm going to do it, because it is necessary and proper to help me administer my responsibilities. Another thing that he's going to do is he's going to insist on being called Mr. President rather than something like His Highness, the President of the United States and defenders of the rights of the same. Why not that title? That sounds better. That's what John Adams proposed. It sounded kingly. Monarchy. Yeah. It sounds more egalitarian. I'm just one of you. I'm just a simple farmer from Virginia. And I'm the president for now, but I'm just like one of you. So Washington is trying to convey that sense of familiarity. Absolutely. Now, the things that Washington does over the course of his 2 terms as president, big thing, he enacts Hamilton's financial plan, and we'll take a look at what exactly is in Hamilton's financial plan in a second. He uses troops to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. Some people would argue it's a bit of an overkill using 13,000 troops to put down a rebellion of 100 people, but it's what happens. He deals with international crisis by declaring neutrality. He serves 2 terms, goes home, and dies. He's back at Mount Vernon for less than 2 years before he dies. Okay? So these are the things that we're going to be paying particular attention to. Hamilton's financial plan, the Whiskey Rebellion, and attempts to remain neutral. That's what makes up his presidential administration. And actually, if you go along and you follow each one of these presidencies, you can boil their presidencies down to a few essential things that you really need to know. Every one of them. I mean, there's lots you could look at, but there's really a couple of things for each one of these guys that you really should know. All right, so let's take a look at Hamilton's financial plan, since that's such a big deal. Hamilton is the money guy. Hamilton is the guy who says we need to get our financial house in order. He's the guy in his report on manufactures that says America has the potential to be an economic superpower. But he says we need to get our economy stabilized. Now, the first thing in doing that is to have a strong central government. Check. Constitution is enacted. Next, he says we need to have a financial plan in place that deals with debt. Because America has incurred a great deal of debt over the course of the American Revolution and the Confederation period. So we've got to deal with our debt. Well, that sounds familiar. So this is Hamilton's financial plan. I'll turn the light off and see if we can get a better view. Move that closer. Let's see if that looks better. Yeah, there you go. Works. Okay. All right, so Hamilton's financial plan. Sometimes it's referred to as the assumption plan. And the reason it's called the assumption plan is because the government the federal government is going to assume or take on all the debts of the country. Okay? So take a look. Private debts owed to foreigners. The government is going to take that on. So if you have a debt owed to foreign governments, privately, the government's going to take that debt from you and assume it. Federal debt that has been accrued by the national government, and then any individual state debts are going to be assumed. And they're going to be wrapped up in one big debt that the government will pay. The federal government will pay this debt. Now, how will they pay for it? There are several revenue streams that are going to help pay for that debt. One is miscellaneous revenue, and that is primarily land sales. Okay, so money from land sales are going to help pay for that debt. Another revenue stream, luxury taxes or an excise tax. You need to know the word excise, but it's a luxury tax. Specifically on whiskey, alcohol. You don't need alcohol, it's a luxury. So we're going to tax it. Do we do that today? We call them sin taxes. What do we tax? What? I can't hear you at all. Never mind. You got to talk over the blower. I can't hear. What do we tax today? Yeah, everything, but specifically, there are high taxes on tobacco, on cigarettes, okay? I know when I go to buy cigars, they are way more expensive than I think they need to be. Alcohol. They even talk about putting a sin tax. There's debate about putting a sin tax on like heavily sugared drinks, sodas, whatnot. So a whiskey tax, and then custom duties. That's right, I said duties. Duties are just import taxes. They're tariffs. So if you're importing goods into the country, it's taxed at the border, and the government gets that tax. So these are the three main revenue streams that the federal government is going to have to make money. Land sales, excise taxes, and tariffs. And that's pretty much going to be the way the government makes its money until the early 20th century. Now, why assume these debts? Why should the federal government take on his private debt, their state debt?
So they have more money to invest in the economy faster?
Who has more money to do what now?
Private investors, private business owners, and whatever have more power to. Yeah.
Okay, so if I assume his debt, his books are clear, he can now invest. He's got the freedom to be able to experiment, try, expand his business, hire people, etc., etc. So that's a positive thing. Yeah. Absolutely. This is to establish buy-in with the federal government. It's to tie the individual to the success of the federal government. It's to tie the states to the success of the federal government. Because if the federal government fails, guess what? You get your debt back. If the federal government fails, guess what? That state gets its debt back. So this is to strengthen. I know it seems counterintuitive, but the idea of debt is to strengthen the federal government, to strengthen the government's authority. Now, one of the controversial things in here is that Hamilton says he's going to fund the debt at par. Now, you golfers out there, what does that mean? What does par mean? Equal, even. But I still don't understand what we're talking about. So hold on a second. During the American Revolution, how did the government pay for troops, supplies, equipment, all of that stuff? Where did they get the money if the Articles government couldn't tax people? Where did they get the money? From the people. How? Yeah. Exactly like an IOU. Exactly like an IOU. Okay? So, you would go to patriotic Americans and say, look, could you help us out? We're trying to win this war. And the people would give money to the government. Now, let's keep this simple. Let's assume you're a patriotic American and you gave the government $1. In response, you get a bill. It says, I owe you $1 plus interest. Okay? Yeah. Not savings bonds, more like war bonds. Okay, we did this during the Civil War, we did it during World War I, we did it during World War II. We do it all the time. It's just we don't call them IOUs, we call them treasury bills. If your parents are invested in T-bills, that's what these are. Basically, people investing money in the government so the government can do things. For instance, at the local level, T-bills, that builds schools, it builds roads, it builds infrastructure. Okay? So anyway, and the promise is you'll get the money back plus interest, and that's how you make money on treasury bills. The idea was that you would get your money back plus interest. So, okay, great. So the end of the American Revolution comes, and you got all these Americans standing out there with these IOUs, and they're waiting for their money. Can the Articles government pay them their money? No. So what in the world are these things worth? Nothing. The Articles government, as a matter of fact, says, and I'm just keeping it simple here, I'm using nice round numbers, we can give you 10 cents on the dollar. That's the best we can do. So you're expecting to get $1 plus interest, and the best you're going to get is 10 cents. Well, you got screwed on that one. Now, Alexander Hamilton says to his investor buddies on Wall Street, I want you to go around and I want you to buy up these IOUs. Only instead of offering, let's say, a dime, offer them 25 cents. 25 cents. Better than a dime, right? So these rich investor guys go around the country buying up these IOUs for 25 cents on the dollar. People think they're getting a good deal because the article's government says, well, we can only give you 10 cents. And then Alexander Hamilton, once all these things are bought up by his rich investor buddies, announces that the federal government will pay the face value of the IOUs. You will get $1 plus interest. Go ahead, what's your reaction? Exactly. And that's the reaction of the average people. They just got screwed in this deal. But why did Hamilton do this? It wasn't just to benefit his rich buddies.
So the investors will invest more money in other things.
Exactly. It's so the investors had more money to invest and make more businesses, make more jobs, and that eventually the wealth would trickle down to the people at the bottom. It was to create political and economic stability, investment, create jobs. More people have jobs, you got more taxpayers. And there you go. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, the anti-federalists, the people who were distrustful of the federal government, railed against this. As a matter of fact, you get an entire political party formed in opposition to this whole thing. So you're right, people do react to it. Because the capstone to this whole thing is a bank. A national bank of the United States to oversee all of this. This is Hamilton's grand plan. A Bank of the United States. It is to ensure the financial system of the United States is stable. But the question is it constitutional? The Constitution doesn't say anything in there about creating a bank. And this Bank of the United States that Hamilton is proposing will be a mixture of public and private investment. The federal government will put its money in there, but it will be run by private investors. It will be a for-profit business. So here you got government in bed with business. And the poor people, the people who are distrustful of a strong central government, the people who say, wait a minute, you can't do that. There's nothing in the Constitution about creating a bank. They start to organize and galvanize in opposition to the bank and to the financial plan. And you get a huge political debate in this country. So huge, it winds up creating essentially two political parties. You've got Hamilton and his belief that you can interpret the Constitution loosely, yes? How people made money off of what? I'll say I don't understand the question.
I don't understand how people made money off of private investors. Why did the government put money in it? I don't get it.
Okay, the government is going to put money in the bank to make sure that the bank has enough money to loan out to individuals. Individuals then borrow that money, they create businesses, they buy real estate, they do whatever that will help them make money. They'll put their money in the bank, and the bank will just cycle that money. I mean, the whole purpose of an economy is to make sure that money is flowing through the economy, that it's loaned to people, people use the money to invest, they make money off of whatever they invest in, and then they put their money back in the bank. So it's a big cycle. Yeah. I don't know where it started, but Hamilton's really the first political practitioner of voodoo economics, trickle-down economics. We'll call it Reaganomics. We'll call it Bushnomics. We'll call it Lincolnomics. We'll call it Kennedynomics. But the idea of giving tax breaks and benefits to the people at the top and allowing that money to trickle down to the people at the bottom, that's been around since Hamilton. So Hamilton says the bank is necessary and proper according to the elastic clause of the Constitution. Stuff not written in the Constitution, up for grabs. Doesn't say we can't have a bank. On the flip side, you've got Jefferson and his crew, and they're saying, wait a minute, that's not in the Constitution. You can only do what's written in the Constitution, and anything beyond, you must create an amendment. So Jefferson and the strict constructionists say, no bank, it's unconstitutional. Hamilton says, yeah, it's constitutional because the elastic clause allows us the flexibility to do it. That's it. Yes, whatever, I'll do what I want. Now, how do things get done in this country? You've got one side that wants a bank, other side that doesn't want a bank. You're going to wind up with a bank, which means that who has to give? Jefferson doesn't have to give. He's the one blocking the bank. Hamilton has to give. So what does he give to Jefferson? Jefferson says, my price is I want the capital moved to the south. That is how you get Hamilton's financial plan enacted and the Bank of the United States ratified over Jefferson's objection. The capital of the United States is moved to the District of Columbia. And there's this grand vision of what Washington, D.C. will become. They believe it's going to become this huge political center, but they also believe it's going to become a huge economic center as well, being located on the Potomac, being a port city. Washington, Jefferson, all these guys from Virginia, all these big landowners from Virginia just saw their real estate values go up, believing that this was going to be an economic center as well. Yeah.
What was it at in the District of Columbia before Washington?
Swamp. And like a farm out here in Georgetown. That was it. Georgetown was like the original settlement. Plus there were some settlements out here too. But it was all kind of swampy farmland. All right. So that's your deal on the financial plan. But what the debate over the bank and the financial plan did was it created two camps. Two camps. The people who generally tended to follow Hamilton and the people who generally tended to follow Jefferson. It's the beginning of the two-party system in America. So, what are the two political parties? The Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, or Jeffersonian Republicans. Sometimes they're referred to as Republicans, but don't confuse them with Lincoln and Reagan and Bush or Eisenhower. The Federalists generally tended to be pro-British, not because they loved the King of England, but because Britain was the richest country in the world, and that's where the money could be made, because they are also pro-trade and pro-industry. They generally tend to be merchants. They generally tend to be in favor of a strong national government. High tariffs, the excise tax, the national bank, the Hamilton financial plan. That's what the Federalists generally tend to be. On the flip side, the Jeffersonian Republicans generally tend to be pro-French. Why pro-French? What's happening at this time in France? Their French Revolution, which is modeled on the American Revolution. They're trying to overthrow their autocratic king. They're trying to establish liberty and democracy and fraternity. What is the liberty, equality, and fraternity? I can't. I don't speak French. I don't speak French. But liberty, equality, and fraternity. They generally tend to be pro-farmer, pro-Joe Sixpack, average person, pro-states' rights. They believe in a limited government, strict interpretation of the Constitution. They are anti-tariff, anti-tax, anti-bank because they believe it hurts poor people. Now, guys, this is a problem because you've got these two political parties within the cabinet. Hamilton is the Secretary of Treasury. Jefferson is the Secretary of State. And they're constantly bumping heads at cabinet meetings. Washington's got to be the referee. And Washington, more times than not, sides with Hamilton over Jefferson, to the point where Jefferson just says, I can't function here, and resigns. All right. So you need to know what the elements of the financial plan are. You need to know the compromise. You need to know what the two political parties stand for and who's associated with which. I'm moving.
Today is Thursday, October 24th, Day. Please stand for your pledge of allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I'm going to quickly get through some of this other stuff here. Okay.
Jackson will be at Southern High School during all lunches on Thursday, October 24th.
Another event that occurs during Washington's administration is the Whiskey Rebellion. Farmers out in western Pennsylvania, angry at the whiskey tax, at the excise tax, organize a rebellion. Does that chestnut sound familiar? Only this time, Washington is going to make sure that this rebellion is put down, and he's going to use enough force to make sure that any potential rebellions down the road are squashed. He is going to organize an army of 13,000 American troops to march out to western Pennsylvania to put down a rebellion of about 100 people. Some people said it was necessary to do this, to create stability and demonstrate the authority of the national government. Other people, like Jefferson, believed that it was overkill, that it was too much force, and that it was demonstrative of the fact that the Constitution created a government that oppressed people. So you've got a debate over the Whiskey Rebellion and Washington's response to it. But you do need to know the Whiskey Rebellion. You do need to know that it demonstrates the authority of the national government and that it created division in the country over how Washington responded. The other thing that Washington has to deal with in his administration over 8 years is how to remain neutral in the face of world conflict. At the end of the American Revolution ended, but the war between Britain and France went on. And as the French Revolution occurred, that war between Britain and France only intensified. France says to America, hey, we've got a treaty of alliance with you guys. We helped you out in your revolution. You need to help us out in our revolution.
Harvest of Hungary. We are collecting canned foods and money.
And America says, we can't do that. We can't help you out. Yes, we're grateful for the help you gave us during the revolution. We think it's great that you're fighting for liberty and freedom, but we don't have the manpower or the economic stability to help you out at this time, so we must remain neutral. Jefferson Jefferson wants to help the French because he sees the French as kindred spirits. But Hamilton worries that if we help the French out, we're just going to anger the British and it's going to impact trade. And Hamilton's all about making the money. Now, the French sent an ambassador named Edmond Genet over to the United States to try to convince the Americans to go around the Washington administration's neutrality proclamation. Genet is arrested and is ordered to leave the country. But before he can leave the country, the government that sent Genet here was overthrown, and so Genet was a man without a country. He was essentially Edward Snowden. And he actually lived out the rest of his years here in the United States on Long Island, got married to an American. But Genet tried to convince Americans to act independently and help the French out. But Americans are divided over what to do. Should we help the French or should we remain, trading with the British? And there's a divide there. Washington says we should remain neutral. And there's the Neutrality Proclamation, which is issued in response to the French calls for aid. We must remain friendly and impartial towards all belligerent powers, nations at war. The British are also going to hurt us in that American ships at sea are going to find themselves under attack by British ships that are going to kidnap American sailors and press them into service in the British Navy. It's called impressment. It's a form of kidnapping. And not only are the British going to kidnap American sailors on the high seas in violation of our neutrality, they are also going to fund the Indians that are attacking us out in Ohio. Remember I talked about Little Turtle and the Shawnee Confederacy? Well, where do you think they're getting the money and the weapons? They're getting them from the British. And there are Americans who say, hey man, we need to respond to that. Not just to the Indians, not just to Little Turtle and the Shawnee Confederacy, but we need to respond to the British helping out those Indians. Washington realizes, look man, we can't go to war and help out the French. We cannot go to war against the British. We cannot do it. So Washington is going to get a treaty with the British, which I will talk more about next class. But it's called, and I'll talk more about it next class, but you need to know Jay's Treaty, what it said, and what the reaction was. Basically, it avoids war with Great Britain, but it's extremely controversial because Britain winds up getting all the best parts of it. Washington becomes very unpopular in the country. He's hanged in effigy throughout the country. Washington had never been hung in effigy before. And I think this event is what convinces Washington to step down after 2 terms. Because he all of a sudden became a politician and very unpopular among a certain group of people. Pinckney's Treaty I'll talk more about next class. He warns us about the dangers of political parties that could tear us apart. Gives a farewell address, warns us to steer clear of permanent alliances, leaves office, and goes back to Mount Vernon after 2 terms, and establishes the 2-term precedent that every president is going to follow until Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt was elected to 4 terms as president, served 3 full terms, and 88 days of his 4th term when he died. After Franklin Roosevelt left office, they enacted a constitutional amendment, the 22nd Amendment, to limit the president to 2 terms. All right, guys, see you next time.